Hi, everybody. Today I'm talking with Rosalba Courtney, who is currently in Australia and will be soon coming to the United States to teach an FMS course. She has over 35 years of experience as an osteopath, got her PhD in breathing, which is today's topic. And is there anything else you want to say about you?
Oh, Matt, that's pretty good. Yeah, I'm an osteopath, and I've been working with breathing for a really long time. Probably started really getting deeply into the whole breathing thing in the early 90s. And I practice, I see patients, I do a lot of breathing work. I assess patients for breathing dysfunction. I run little breathing groups for patients, for children and adults, and different sorts of conditions. And I also do research and train practitioners in the sort of model that I developed when I was doing my PhD, which is called, it's the multidimensional model of dysfunctional breathing. And I call what I do integrative breathing therapy because it combines a whole lot of different approaches. It's sort of individualized.
Well, in case if anybody hasn't taken that course, I took it last year in Los Angeles at a live course, and the reason I did that was because the online course was so awesome. So you can get that.
Right. That's great. So you did the online course, and you've been using some of the material, Matt?
I have. Not probably as extensively as you, but
well,
a lifetime to keep getting better at it. But all the things,
great.
Things like that, I'm not super awesome at it yet, but I try to use any of it whenever I can. I talk about breathing a lot with people, so I think I probably talk about it more than I actually use it with everybody.
Yes.
And I'm trying to find ways to actually integrate it with every single person I can. And there's times where you can. I'm a massage therapist, so I can have to talk people through certain types of breathing just to kind of relax them or get them to move a certain way when I do my ART. But
that's terrific.
Yeah.
So just bringing a consciousness about breathing into your sessions and bringing people's awareness to it, that's a good thing.
So the most interesting thing is I have to be really careful about how I word take a deep breath for people, because the first thing they tend to do, and you pointed this out in the online courses, they tend to just pop up. So if anybody's ever seen a pufferfish, they blow up. So
yeah,
deep breathing, as I kind of learned, isn't really about how much of a breath you can take. It's, would it be fair to say it's more the ability for the lungs to expand? But if there's too much air in there, they can't expand.
Yeah, deep breathing isn't the be-all and end-all of breathing. The best breathing is functional breathing. And functional breathing is breathing, that's adaptive, appropriate, responsive, and supportive of other body systems, which sounds like a bit of a mouthful. But the idea is just that people should be breathing according to their body's needs. And if they're breathing as if they're running when they're sitting and resting, that's an issue. Most people, if you ask them to take a deep breath without coaching them, will tend to breathe, thoracic, upper rib cage, vertical breath. And but some people, even when you coach them, they're unable to breathe, lower rib cage, front, back, abdomen, breathe into the lower part of their body. That's called the relaxed configuration of breathing. So a deep breath, if it's slow, should give you that relaxed configuration of breathing. A deep breath, if it's fast and sudden, will tend to breathe like this, high. But a lot of people who are, stressed or anxious or sick or overtraining or whatever, they will tend in general to overbreathe. So they'll tend to breathe in excess of their body's needs, and they have trouble breathing in a relaxed configuration, in a relaxed manner. So they'll have trouble being adaptive with their breathing. Being able to breathe in a relaxed configuration means you've got to be relaxed, and a lot of people find it hard to get there.
Cool. All right. So one thing that you talked about before, can you kind of explain the flywheel and how overbreathing and all that?
Oh, the flywheel effect with breathing? Yeah, people whose breathing control has been sort of overstimulated, the breathing control system has been overstimulated for a long time, will sometimes really become disrupted in how they chemically regulate their breath. So normally when a person, is breathing, they will be taking in oxygen and breathing out CO2. And when you're healthy, all of that will be imbalanced. But if you've been over-breathing and hyperventilating, you'll be blowing off too much CO2. And over time, the homeostasis of breathing becomes disrupted. So you end up with a depletion of bicarbonate, and the pH of the cell changes. And people, when they are stimulated to increase their ventilation, say exercise or sport, or if they get excited or if they're talking a lot, they, instead of reducing their breathing when their CO2 is depleted, they'll actually keep over breathing. So there's a test for that. It's called the hyperventilation provocation test. And you'll get people, while you're measuring their CO2, you'll get them to breathe, big breaths like this till they drop their CO2 down to around 20. And then you get them to stop doing that after a couple of minutes, and then you watch how long it takes for the CO2 to come back to the normal range. And when people have this broken, breathing control system, after 3 minutes, their CO2 still hasn't recovered. So the drop of CO2 actually acts as a stimulus to people to keep over breathing, and that's a problem. So, for example, you'll get people with panic disorder who are prone to do that, people with anxiety disorder that are prone to do that. People with sleep apnea can have that tendency to have that sort of flywheel effect with breathing, where there's instability of breathing, and it can contribute to sleep apnea, for example.
All right, so here's my questions I thought about, because I talk to people about these all the time, and these are the most common things people ask me anyways. But I guess probably answered this bit already, but what's the biggest misconception about breathing? And you already said that it's not about basically how deep you breathe, but...
Yeah. The biggest misconception about breathing is, well, there are many. A lot of people think that your breathing should always be regular, even, deep, diaphragmatic, that you should be breathing like a little robot, the same all the time, super smooth. And I think the thing about breathing is that the healthiest breathing is really breathing that's, supporting all the different functions in the body that are connected with breathing. There are many, many functions connected with breathing. So posture and motor control is connected with breathing. Speech and vocalization is connected with breathing. Cardiac regulation, the regulation of blood pressure and heart rate is interconnected with breathing. And then, people also change their breathing for their various levels of arousal. So, if you're stimulated, angry, upset, you'll breathe in a particular way. If you're relaxed, you'll breathe in a particular way. So your breathing's interacting with all of those different things. And, sometimes I see people who have done breathing training. I'm just thinking of someone who I saw earlier this week who has been very, very ill with a chronic sort of Lyme-like illness. And he's been really working on calming himself down, managing his energy, conserving his strength, and his life has become more and more limited. And he really kind of breathes in this very, very sort of controlled way all the time. And when I was testing his breathing, what I found was that he really couldn't sort of increase his breathing or breathe up into his chest when he needed to, or adapt and change his breathing. He was so over-controlling his breath that it meant that his body wasn't getting the kind of balance in his autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic, parasympathetic balance that you like to see. And, there are many, many healing methods in the world, and some of them use strong breathing. And even for immune regulation, for controlling the inflammatory response, there's research out there showing that some of the strong forms of breathing, the big breathing, like Wim Hof type breathing or Sudarshan Kriya type breathing, that they actually help cytokines to normalize, the inflammatory response to normalize, and the immune system to go up. So with this particular patient, what I've been doing is actually just getting him very carefully to work with a range of different rhythms of breathing so that the breathing can teach his nervous system how to kind of not just be in scared mouse withdrawn mode, but to, you know, give his system a bit of a workout.
Cool. All right. So that kind of leads to my next question, which are how emotions are tied, or our emotions are tied with how we breathe. And I have one client who specifically, I'm trying to help her stand in a way where she's not like a scared mouse, where she's very much just sort of comfortable with standing there, and she's not comfortable standing in her own skin. She's not comfortable in any way. And she's becoming more so, and she's becoming more active. So anytime I get her to do breathing or movement, I'm trying to be as positive with the words that I can so that I don't engage any negative thoughts in her about breathing. So what are ways that people, how really are the emotions basically tied to physical breathing?
Yeah, well, it's a two-way interaction. So breathing affects the mind and emotions affect the mind and breathing in so many different ways. So, for example, you know, humans are very prone to having disordered breathing. We developed very complex breathing control system. Some people think because of the fact that we need to constantly be interrupting our breathing to produce speech. speech that has rhythm and meaning and nuance and emotional tone and so on. So we, if we're overthinking, then we're constantly disrupting kind of smooth patterns of breathing with our thinking, because our breathing responds to our thoughts. And if there's really a huge amount of internal chatter all the time, then the breathing can become very irregular. If a person is very anxious and they're always anticipating danger or difficulty, and they're very cautious and kind of threat vigilant, then sometimes their breathing becomes very irregular because they're always holding their breath in anticipation of some threat that they might need to. They don't quite know what's going to happen, so stop breathing until you know whether you need to fight, flight, or whether you're safe. Okay, so that can make the breathing very irregular. And it kind of ends up breaking the breathing control system a little bit, because it stops breathing being adaptive, appropriate, responsive, and supportive. You know, it stops breathing being functional when it's happening too long. So breathing is not meant to be super regular, but it's also not meant to be madly chaotic and irregular either. So some people, you need to sort of encourage a bit more variability in their breathing patterns, and some people you need to encourage some sort of smoothness and flow and greater kind of embodiment and less mental stuff to regulate their breathing. But also all emotions affect the breathing. There's been an amazing amount of research done about this, and pretty much every neurotransmitter will have some impact on breathing. And some people have actually mapped how all the different emotions change the breathing. So breathing ratios between inhalation and exhalation, the pauses, the speed with which you breathe in, the depth, the this, the that. So emotions will really change your breath. You breathe differently when you're sad to how you breathe when you're happy. You breathe differently when you're scared to how you breathe when you're feeling safe, content, and connected. And so it goes that way. But the other thing about breathing is because when you breathe, you directly affect your brain. Breathing rhythms are reflected in oscillations of brainwave activity within the limbic system. So when you breathe, you're directly communicating with your brain and changing your brain's patterns and rhythms. And that's why breathing is the foundation of so many different meditation techniques, you know. And that's why people use breathing to self-regulate. They will breathe to calm themselves, to focus, to decrease their level of arousal, and so on. Okay, so two-way street.
Cool. I mean, I had a friend who, she told me after for her Pilates certification that she said she didn't know this before, but there's like 8 types of breath and blood, which are pretty fascinating. And I think that you've probably got a bunch of different types, but different types of breathing for different exercises, different mental states.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lot about variability. I think it's important not to get stuck on, one type of breathing.
I actually have one question I hadn't thought of before we were talking. I tell people when I notice my breathing getting a little bit more like this when I'm actually talking in front of people, it seems to have become an upper chest and mouth breather. I say, look, because I don't have a regulation in my breath. I'm speaking to you, so it's making it harder for me to breathe because I can't circulate. But how do you go about breathing? Is there something that you do to prep before you actually speak in front of people? Or do you just kind of go?
I don't. People do, and you could. And some people need to. Do you know, if I think too much about breathing when I'm speaking, I can end up sounding a little bit robotic. And I prefer to just kind of breathe and speak naturally. One of the things is you do try, and people who are bad hyperventilators, you often have to train them to slow their speech down, to modulate it, to listen more and speak less, and that would be, something. Often people who are anxious will just kind of talk too fast and too much and don't stop to take a breath. So it's generally, slow down your breathing, slow down your pauses in your speech. Have a few more pauses in your speech. Listen more than you talk. That would probably be the main thing. But if you really, some people really do a lot of work on just learning to always breathe through the nose and then breathe out through the mouth. Breathe in through the nose and then breathe out through the mouth. And I think if I know I'm speaking for a long time and I have to save my energy, I start to do that sort of thing. I slow my speech down even more, and I just try and stay as relaxed as I can. Breathe through my nose and then breathe out through my mouth. But just small conversations like this, I'm not focusing on my breathing because
I'm focusing right now.
It's distracting. I'd rather focus on you and what you're saying and me and what I'm saying in our interaction, thinking too much about myself and my breathing. But there you go. Does that answer your question?
It does. I just naturally kind of slow my speech, and if I need to, I'll just take a minute or just a couple breaths to hang on. And then going.
Very good. Yeah.
They don't care. I mean, if you're just getting on to the next topic, whatever. Sometimes when there's kind of a break between topics, so you can just, you can look like you're actually doing something, even if you're just kind of helping.
Yeah, just take those little pauses. It's all about the yin and the yang, You've got to be switched on and then you need to switch off, switch on, switch off. Okay. That's what we're built to do.
So a lot of people have asked me, what can they do to kind of self-assess like how they're breathing? Because I know that there's two ways to do that. And just got to tell you, I sometimes forget that there's two ways to do it, but there's the one that you developed, and then what the other one was. But what are the two?
The two questionnaires, you mean? Yeah, sure. There are two questionnaires that are most commonly used. One is called the Nijmegen questionnaire. It's a questionnaire that's been around for 30 years, and to spell it is probably helpful because it doesn't sound like you spell it. It's Nijmegen, like a Nijmegen, the town. And I'm not even saying it correctly. If you're Dutch, you'd be saying that's not how you say it. But Nijmegen is better than Nijmegen, which is some people say Nijmegen. So it's a Nijmegen questionnaire. And I think the Dutch might call it Nijmegen or something like that. And then there's a self-evaluation of breathing questionnaire. And the Nijmegen questionnaire was really developed as a questionnaire for hyperventilation syndrome. And it assesses, different aspects, different types of symptoms that occur in people with dysfunctional breathing. Not just hyperventilation. So they've found now it's not just about hyperventilation, it's a dysfunctional breathing questionnaire. And then another questionnaire, the one that I developed, is called the Self-Evaluation of Breathing questionnaire. And the Self-Evaluation of Breathing questionnaire just looks at different types of breathing symptoms that might be coming from, the chemoreceptors being too sensitive, or that chemical system of breathing being a little bit broken, and the biomechanical aspects of breathing, which is, more how the brain and the muscles are kind of communicating with each other about whether breathing is appropriate, adequate, sufficient, satisfying, and so on. So they're the two questionnaires, the Nijmegen and the Self-Evaluation of Breathing questionnaire. They're both free access questionnaires. You can generally find them on the internet somewhere. But if people, want a copy of the Self-Evaluation of Breathing questionnaire, I'm happy to email it to them.
I had a client who was convinced that doing crunches was going to help her for flat stomach, which I couldn't figure out a way to tell her that's not only not true, it's unscientifically unsound. But she was going to do it anyways. And people do that all the time. I had a soccer player years ago that I was coaching who she started hyperventilating during the game, and I had to take her out, and it sort of came out that she was holding her core so tight because she was doing like 500 to 1,000 crunches every day. And it's going to basically keep you extra tight without doing much. But some people have the idea that they get the idea from some aspects of breathing that holding your core tight is a good idea. But they don't understand that doing it all the time is not a good idea. What makes
exactly. Well, if people are holding their belly tight all the time, it just tends to make them tight all the time. Holding your belly tight all the time will often actually inhibit, the diaphragm from functioning optimally. Because remember, your breathing should be adaptive. Your diaphragm does different things depending on what ventilatory and postural needs are. Your diaphragm has to interpret what's going on. If you're always holding your belly tight, then the diaphragm isn't coordinating and communicating well with abdominal muscles. So normally when the diaphragm contracts, abdominal muscles should eccentrically release. You should get some lengthening. And if you're always over controlling them, and you might inhibit some of that eccentric motion, which would allow your belly to just kind of relax a little out. And so it's better to train for functionality than for some rigid form. Okay, so if someone's got a very tight belly, often what they'll start to do is use their shoulders and their accessory respiratory muscles to breathe. So while, you don't want poor abdominal tone, you just want appropriate abdominal tone that's a bit changeable. It turns on and off according to different body states and conditions where you're at, whether you're, in a state of tension, upright arousal, ready to run down a field, or whether you're sitting comfortably, listening to music.
Okay. What's something that people can do every day for the breathing? Just to kind of check in. Aside from the questionnaires, you don't have to take those every day, but just physiologically, what could people do every day?
Yeah, I think most people could do with slowing their breathing down when they relax. When they're sitting quietly, they could do with slowing their breathing down and making it lower, slower, and softer when they're relaxed. And just taking time every single day to spend a little bit of time where you sit repeatedly throughout the day and sit and just settle into your body and make your breath a little slower, a little lower, and a little softer. Just gives that nice balance to the hectic lives that we all tend to live.
So if they were doing that, how long would be a normal time?
5 minutes. But of course, the longer you do it, the more benefit you get. Depends how overstimulated and over-aroused your system is. You need to put in, proportionately. The more stressed you are, the more you need to do. But I think just repeated, little times during the day of just putting a little bit of that relaxed, low, slow, soft breathing would do most people a lot of good. But having this idea that, they should do really slow, deep breathing, or, that they need to make their breath big, can lead them into trouble, because thinking that you've always got to make the breath big, I haven't got time to explain it here, but, if your breathing muscles aren't set quite right, trying to breathe too much can actually interfere with your breathing. So just relax, low, slow, soft. That's the main mantra. Low, slow, soft, relaxed breathing.
Here's the last question I have. Can you explain how someone's doing controlled yoga type breathing, even if it's really slow, like they're taking a long breath, they don't stop? Because sometimes I have to tell people that it's okay to take a break in between inhale and exhale, and all they do is continuously breathe.
Yeah, just go. Yeah, people can overbreathe. They can hyperventilate. Some people, with the best intentions, will end up hyperventilating because they're already on the edge. Their carbon dioxide's already low. They're already on the edge. And so they do a class where they're breathing too much without a pause. They're not following their body's natural inclination to want to pause, and they can just end up, creating a little bit of disruption in the breathing system.
Okay, awesome. Will you just talk briefly about the upcoming FMS breathing course that you're teaching?
Yeah, sure. So the FMS one-day course is sort of to support the video. So I collaborated with FMS a few years ago to do a breathing video. And that's a sort of an intensive 3-hour training that takes people through that multidimensional model and teaches them some tools for assessing each of the dimensions of dysfunctional breathing, which is basically the biochemical, the biomechanical, and the psychophysiological. And it's really, a pretty brief, sort of condensed version. And so we teach them hands-on techniques in that video. So this one-day course is going to be an opportunity for people it'll be a bit of a review of the important things in that video. And then there's also time for people to practice and learn, get feedback on using some of the techniques like the MARM, the Manual Assessment of Respiratory Motion, which is a validated technique for assessing breathing pattern. So we'll do the full version of the MARM, and then we'll do a simplified version of the MARM. We're going to do a bunch of case histories where we talk about people who are patients of mine. I'll explain how breathing was a major factor in helping them with different conditions, and then we'll look at what the results of the various assessments were with those people. And then we'll go into a little more depth on things like using breath holding as a tool for assessment and treatment of breathing dysfunction. We're going to do a brand new thing on that course. I'm going to teach, we might have taught it when you did the 2-day course in Los Angeles last year, but I'll be doing the breathing basics routine, which is
You did that. I think that was the last.
Yeah, you did that. Yeah. So it's a protocol for retraining the diaphragm and retraining breathing muscle coordination using a range of postures and positions. So it's the way that I do it. And we'll all get a chance to practice that and learn how to teach it and so on. So it's hopefully a very nice mix of theory and practical. And I think when people sign up for that course, they get the video as well.
So it's going to be in Des Plaines, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, pretty close to the airport on September 16th. It's coming up, so you should sign up for it because I'm taking it, even though I took the other one, because I want to get better at breathing. And as a massage therapist, there are parts of the hands-on manual assessment of breathing where you have one hand up here, one hand on the opposite rib cage, one hand on the same side rib cage, where you have to move your hands and assess physically the body very specifically, and you can tell pretty quickly where the restrictions are coming from for people. So just from a massage standpoint or any manual hands-on release technique, you can kind of pinpoint quicker where you actually need to help the person breathe and where you need to release things to help them breathe. So it's pretty cool stuff. So I'm just
cool.
a journey on it, and I love it.
That's great. Fantastic. I'm doing a couple of other talks in America as well. I'm giving a talk in Denver about sleep apnea. The focus is on sleep apnea. So it's getting the most out of breathing retraining for sleep apnea. So a lot of people think that sleep apnea is all about, the anatomy, whether there's obstruction. But the functional side is incredibly important because it's all breathing related reflexes that either open or close the airway at night. So I'll be giving a talk in Denver a few days after Chicago. So it's about I think it's the 20th in Denver. And then on the 22nd, I'm giving the same talk in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, on the Saturday afternoon, which I think is the 22nd. And all of the bookings for all that is on my website.
Awesome. Is there anything else?
No. Thank you for the interview. That was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you for...
Lovely to see you. Lovely to talk to you. Thanks for those great questions. They were really good.